Today I'm going to tell you 3 stories that are weird but completely true. But before we get started, if you're into weird, dark, and mysterious things told in story form, you've come to the right place. Because that's exactly what we do, and we only post once a week. If you really want to steal their like button, then smash everything on their phone, messing around with all their apps so no one can find them. And don't forget to subscribe, turn on all your notifications, because you don't want to miss the chilling stories we're sending you every week. Okay, now, brace yourself for today's 3 terrifying stories. The morning of October 30, 2014. The sky was clear. The wind was light. A peaceful morning in Wichita, Kansas. Sergei Galitsky, a 54-year-old Russian pilot, walked through the glass doors of the Flight Safety International building. He was not alone. His interpreter walked beside him, both of them silent, as if they had done this 100 times. No one was in a hurry. No one was afraid. They had come for a seemingly innocuous reason: certification to fly. A day of testing. A practice session. It was all formality on paper, but in the brightly lit hallways and calm shell of that training building, something was waiting. Not a mistake, not an oversight, but fate patient, silent, and unforgiving. And by the end of that day, none of them were breathing. The receptionist nodded, polite to the point of invisibility. From the empty hallway emerged Jay Ferguson, a 78-year-old flight instructor, with a gentle smile and eyes that had seen a lifetime of people quietly pass by in the cockpit. He had no idea who he would smile at for the last time. The 3 men moved deeper inside, through corridors of stark white, coldly clean. On the walls were nameless devices, silent, impersonal, and meaningful technology. Each step echoed like the slow beat of a heart, counting down. Finally, they stopped in front of a white cylindrical machine, huge, soulless, as brazen as anything but this world. An outsider might have called it a high-tech game, a safe simulator, a harmless training vehicle. But Sergei was no outsider. He had flown in snow, in storms, in war and peace. And when he looked at that white shell, he knew it was no game. It was where the boundary between reality and fantasy could break. He didn't know. Today, that boundary would break. Jay unlatched the simulator. The door swung open like the mouth of a white beast, lifeless and ready to devour. Inside, a perfect replica of a Cessna cockpit, every switch, every pressure gauge, every lever was creepy. Even the windows were more than screens. They opened onto a runway, so real it made one forget they were in a box. Sergei took the pilot's seat, the seat reserved for the man in command of his fate. Jay sat quietly beside him, his aged eyes gleaming with something Sergei couldn't read, perhaps professional habit, or perhaps intuition. The interpreter settled quietly in the back seat. No one said a word. A very faint sound began to resonate, a soft hum, like the sigh of living metal. The cockpit seemed to close off from the outside world. There was no way out, no more present, only simulation. Only a strange feeling seeping into my skin. Too real. So real that it's suspicious. So real that if I died here, perhaps no one would be able to tell the difference anymore. Jay nodded. A low rumble, the sound of a simulated engine starting up, but it sounded like a call from the ground. The simulator began to vibrate, as if it weren't a machine at work, but something awakening. Sergei let go of the brake. His hand pushed the throttle, slowly but firmly. No one spoke, just the shudder of metal, the sound of wheels rolling across the cold simulated floor. They were rolling toward the runway, but there was no wind, no air, just a feeling of being swallowed a digital reality with no turning point. Sergey pulled the control stick lightly. The simulator lifted. The whole simulator shook harder, tilting slightly as it glided through the air. The view outside, just programming code, transformed into a sky of clouds and virtual light. They flew through a world that wasn't real, but still made people's hearts beat faster. Jay glanced over, lips moving, about to say something, but didn't, because he could feel it too. Something was wrong. It felt like flying. It felt creepy. It was flying, but not in a way they could control anymore. For nearly an hour, Sergey flew the plane as if it were a real flight. Outside the simulator window, the simulated sky went from bright to dark, as if sensing what was coming. He learned quickly, very quickly. The controls were smaller, more sensitive than the commercial planes he had flown. But his hands had adapted to the strangeness. Jay watched silently, his aged eyes unreadable. A slow nod approval or warning. No one knew. It was time to land. Sergey tilted the plane, starting to descend. The sound in the simulator changed a growing hum, like an invisible pressure squeezing the air. The runway appeared before him, but it was dimmer, distorted, as if it did not belong to the real world. The cabin lights flickered briefly. Jay tightened his seatbelt. No one laughed. No congratulations. Just a silence that was too perfect. Too wrong. Sergey landed, but something didn't want them to touch down. The landing gear touched down on the simulated runway. Then, hell opened. Boom! A loud explosion tore through the air. The entire building shook as if it had been lifted and thrown by an invisible hand. Inside the simulation chamber, everything went black. No more lights. No more engine noise. Not a simulation. Not training. This was reality. This was death. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, before everything was plunged into total darkness. Outside, a column of thick black smoke rose high, curling like demonic fingers reaching up toward the sky. The smell of fire, of gasoline, of molten metal, intense, suffocating, unforgettable. No more simulation, no more chance. Only ashes remained, and an unanswered question. Why? Those standing nearby heard the explosion before they knew what was happening. Then they turned and froze. A real plane, staggering through the sky like a bird with a broken wing. It wobbled a few desperate beats, then plummeted as if pulled by an invisible hand. A screech. A white flash. A world-shattering impact. The six-seater, piloted by Mark Goldstein, had spun out of control seconds after takeoff. It didn't hit the open ground. It didn't stop in the tree line. It crashed straight into the flight safety building, straight into its heart, straight into the live simulation chamber. Walls exploded like paper. Steel frames bent like broken bones. Reality tore apart the simulation. Death crept into the place where people could only hope to learn to survive. A digital test turns into a final lesson. The explosion ripped through space. Death was instantaneous, merciless. Jay Ferguson, Sergey Galitsky, the translator beside him, and Mark Goldstein, the pilot of the real plane, all dead. A simulation chamber created to prevent accidents, now the epicenter of a terrible disaster. A place that seemed safe turned into a graveyard of lives. An indistinguishable collision between fantasy and reality, between simulation and cold, inevitable death. Only the haunting echoes of tragedy remained. No one could forget. No one could erase. There were no screams, No monster in the dark. No warning. Only a steel bird falling from the sky without anger, without intent. Just error. A moment meant to simulate safety became the most terrifying reality imaginable. It was meant to be a test, a procedural certification, a normal flight simulator in an unremarkable training facility. But then, it all turned into the ultimate nightmare, a chilling reminder that death doesn't wait for permission. And sometimes, reality doesn't knock gently. It smashed through the wall, shattering the boundaries between fantasy and disaster. At exactly 4 p.m. on Saturday, October 26, 2019, a 56-year-old woman named Pamela Kreimeier stood in the middle of her son's backyard in Knoxville, Iowa. She was surrounded by the people she loved most: her son, her pregnant daughter-in-law, and a small group of relatives. Laughter drifted through the autumn leaves on the wind, as if everything were peaceful. They had gathered for a seemingly simple reason: a gender reveal party. The expectant grandmother smiled, her eyes filled with excitement. They all waited for a puff of blue or pink smoke to rise from the device they had assembled themselves, a fun way to welcome a new life. But little did they know, they had inadvertently called forth the name of death. What began as a celebration of life would end in a moment of horror that no one could erase from their memories. Pamela, a dedicated woman, worked full-time at the U.S. military base near her home, but she didn't live for work. She lived for moments like this: a mother, a grandmother, a gentle heart devoted to her family. The autumn afternoon painted the lawn a golden yellow, and as the family lined up along the old wooden fence, Pamela held up her phone, her hands shaking but her lips still smiling. She didn't want to miss a moment. None of them did. This was a memory they thought would live forever with love. And it did live forever, just not in the way they had imagined. This was no longer a family memory. This was a survivor's memory. In the middle of the courtyard, a strange machine stood alone, like an object from another world. It was a homemade metal tube, rough, cold, rigged to shoot colored dust into the sky. Blue for boys, pink for girls. A harmless game, or so they thought. Pamela's son stepped closer to the device, crouching low as if he were activating something more important than they realized. He turned, shouting, his voice shaking with excitement. "Okay, everyone ready?" Pamela gave him a thumbs up, the sunlight catching the small smile on her face. Laughter was all around. Phone cameras flashed. All eyes focused on a single point. Then he lit the fuse. A hissing sound came from the metal tube, wafting like the breath of an underground demon. For a moment no one spoke. No one laughed. There was only the sound of the wind blowing through the dry leaves, and the sound of the fuse burning faster and faster. The machine came to life. What followed was not joy flying in the sunlight, no colored dust, no laughter, no emotional moment, but a roar that tore through the sky. An explosion, a deafening, fierce, thunderous sound right next to the ear. The ground shook. The air shattered. People screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the lightning storm. The metal tube the thing made to announce the good news was actually a killing machine, a homemade bomb filled with gunpowder, sealed with blind faith and deadly stupidity. When the fuse ignited, it did not shoot. It erupted. It tore. The entire tube exploded into dozens of razor-sharp metal fragments, flying at a speed no human eye could follow. 400 feet of death. Shards of debris pierced trees, penetrated fences, and found human flesh. One moment, they were a happy family together. The next screams blood and fallen figures. Pamela never saw color. Not pink, not blue. Only black, the color of blood, of silence, of the end. She still held the phone up, her smile unfinished. Then a sound tore through the air like the scream of death itself. A piece of metal, hot, sharp, and ruthless, flew like an invisible bullet, straight into her head. No scream, no time to grieve. She collapsed like a shadow, her head tilted to the side, blood dripping onto the damp grass. The phone fell from her hand, still spinning, blinking, as if trying to record something that shouldn't be recorded. All around her were screams, cries, the howling wind that seemed to tear the sacred moment to dust. A moment that had once been a happy moment for the whole family, now a curse no one dared to name. When the rescue team arrived, they did not enter a disaster scene. They entered a scene that looked like it had just emerged from hell. The wooden fence was torn apart, each piece like a bloody claw across the lawn. The house walls were pockmarked with deep stab wounds. Sharp-toothed metal had been driven into them with blind fury. Shards, sharp, cold, and lifeless, spattered everywhere, like the remains of some bloody ritual no one understood. It was no longer an idyllic Iowa afternoon. There were no birds, no wind, just a cold silence, echoing the echoes of a man-made disaster, cruel and irreversible. And then they saw Pamela. She lay there like a collapsed stone statue. Her head was tilted to one side, her blood-stained hair blending with the grass. The phone was still in her hand, the screen was black, but everyone knew. The last image it recorded was not pink or blue. It was the flash of death. In the memories of those who witnessed it, Pamela would forever stand there, smiling, just before everything turned to ash. After an investigation, the authorities revealed a brutal truth, a truth that no one at the party fully understood. What they called fireworks was actually a bomb, a metal tube packed with gunpowder, not for fun but for death, a deadly device, hand-assembled, uncontrolled, and poorly understood, yet powerful enough to tear apart everything within a 100-foot radius. When the fuse burned to its final flame, it did not shoot a plume of blue or pink smoke into the sky as everyone expected. It exploded hissing like an ancient curse. It screamed hot metal, carrying with it the speed, gravity, and silence of death. The tube did not reveal the child's gender. It pronounced the sentence, and that sentence was blood. No one was arrested. No one was charged. The case was closed with two cold words, accident, but no words legal or humane could soften the shock in Pamela's family's hearts. They had lost more than a mother, a grandmother. They had built the machine that had torn their hearts apart. They called it Gender Reveal Day. But in truth, it was the day they gave birth to their obsession. Every laugh before the explosion now turned into a stab that replayed over and over in their memories. And now, in every shattered dream, they still see the phone falling, see the frozen smile, and hear the explosion that never really stopped. Nameless terror needs no darkness. It does not lurk in the deep woods. It does not whisper in the dark corners. It does not emerge from the ghostly nightmares. Sometimes it appears harmless. Sometimes it stands in the sunlight, amidst laughter, amidst love, amidst what seems to be the purest moment of human existence. And the scariest thing of all, it does not come from the devil. It comes from our own hands, shaped piece by piece, assembled piece by piece, lighted by hope, and buried by it. Pamela Kreimier did not die of hatred, not of resentment, not of something dark that lurks deep within the human heart. She died of joy twisted, because a moment that should have been filled with laughter exploded into a scream. No one meant anything bad. No one expected anything to happen. But tragedy does not need a villain. It only needs a misguided idea, a fuse lit in the midst of a family, and a silence that no one wants to break. Let Pamela's story be a warning, silent but painful, because sometimes death needs no reason. All it takes is a spark, and silence, the most timely but the most wrong. Afternoon of September 27, 1956. In the deadly desert of Maralinga, South Australia, a scorching sun scorched the horizon. A 13-year-old Indian boy, Neri Morgan, walked silently, his two younger brothers following close behind. They said nothing, not a laugh, not a whisper, only the wind whistling through the scorched bush and the crunch of dry bones under bare feet. Their footprints were etched into the dry, cracked earth, like scars on a rotting body. They were tracking a kangaroo, but what they were really chasing was survival in a seemingly lifeless land. They were from the Martu tribe, an isolated indigenous community that had never known cities, telephones, or atomic bombs. For them, Maralinga was home, a home the sky had abandoned, and the hot sand groaned. This was no game, not a ritual. It was a fragile existence in a dying world. In the distance, the sun began to sink to the horizon like a bleeding eye closing. None of the three children knew that only hours earlier, the sky had been torn apart by an invisible explosion, a ghost from the liberated West. No smoke, no screams, but the air had changed color, and death does not need to speak. The children had been tracking the kangaroos for hours. The sand burned beneath their feet, their throats as dry as if they had been scraped clean off the last of their skin. Every time they thought they were close to their prey, the animals would bolt like ghosts, as if they were running from something invisible, a terror only wild animals could feel. Disappointment twisted in their hungry stomachs. But then, the kangaroos stopped. Ahead was a water hole, a rare little puddle in the midst of death. They drank, slowly, cautiously. The three brothers crouched on the ground, their breaths caught in their throats, their hearts pounding in their ears like war drums. Eyes fixed on the animals, Neri raised her hand, the signal to approach. And then it began. No sound, no warning, no wind, no clouds. It was just. The sky changed suddenly. Pale silver light fell like a shroud. The kangaroos raised their heads in unison. Then they ran. Not because of the sound, not because of the smell of people. They ran as if the earth itself was rotting beneath their feet. A screech, not of wind, the sound of metal rubbing against air, the sound of something silently tearing apart the sky above. Without any of the three children having time to look up, Neri felt an invisible heat pass over his skin. He didn't know if he was trembling from fear or from something that was seeping into his flesh. His eyes were still fixed on the water hole, where the water was starting to bubble. The birds had fallen silent. A chill ran down his spine. Something had changed. None of the three brothers knew that from that moment, they no longer belonged to the world of the living. A deep, distant roar, deep, as if it came from the bowels of the earth, not from any living thing. No one called, no one warned. Only the echo lingered like an ancient curse, awakened. The earth shuddered, but not as if the sky were shaking. It was a choked hiss, as if the rocks were crying, writhing as something was crawling out from beneath the rough skin of the world. And then, the sky exploded, a blinding white light that was not like light, but like a knife that cut through vision, scorching the retinas, leaving in their minds black streaks that would never fade. For a moment, time itself stopped. There were no shadows, no shapes. There was only white, absolute white, as if reality had been erased. A hot wind, not of life, not of the sun, but of the depths of another world, hitting the three children like an atomic hammer. They were blown away, not fallen, but thrown back like straw in a firestorm. They could no longer feel their flesh, only pain and whiteness and silence. Then the ground cracked, not ordinary cracks, but dark sinuous fissures like the veins of demons, stretching as far as the eye could see. Each time the ground shook, rocks rose and fell, as if the planet itself were disintegrating. In the air, the smell of burning metal mingled with burning flesh, and something nameless, colorless, but alive, something that was quietly penetrating every cell, every breath, every memory. Neri could no longer hear her sister. His ears were filled with a long, muffled scream in the vacuum. On his skin, red blisters began to appear, smoldering silently, like a prophecy from man. And he knew this was not the light of God. This was the light of the end. Stunned, Neri staggered back to the waterhole, eyes blurred with tears and fire. He blinked, forced himself to see, but what was happening couldn't be real. The kangaroos had vanished from the ground. They floated in the air, each one pulled by an invisible force, no flapping, no crying, just hanging, twisting, like zombies hanging by misty ropes. Their bodies twisted in the non-existent wind, heads drooping, legs stretched out, as if the life had been drained from their bones. And now they were held by something that had never belonged to this earth. They hung like marionettes, no strings, no controls, just the emptiness of a twisted power, toying with life as if they were mere experiments. 1 second, 2 seconds, then boom, 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 all at once. The sound was dry, heavy, and carnal, as if the sky had dropped a bag full of rotting flesh. The bodies fell before the three children, twisted, motionless, eyes wide open and empty. There was no sign of death, no wound, no reason. It was just turned off. Then the light was gone, not fading, not slowly withdrawing. It went out abruptly, like a broken switch. There was nothing. No wind, no breathing, no sound, just absolute silence, as thick as the ash after an execution. Neri looked around, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. He didn't cry, didn't scream. It couldn't, because he knew something had just entered this world. And it had seen them. To the three children, it was not a nightmare. It was a miracle. They did not understand where the light came from, or why the earth cracked as if it were dying. They knew nothing about bombs or radiation or invisible death. They saw only flesh. They saw life falling like a gift from the sky. With simple eyes and ancient faith, they believed that the gods had acted, that God had struck down the kangaroos and sent them to their feet a sacred gift, a blessing. They knelt, heads bowed, hands trembling as they lifted the warm carcasses. There was no blood, no injuries, only limp, lifeless bodies. They carried the gift back, stumbling through the hot sand and ashes, unaware they were carrying death. That night, the tribe gathered around a big fire, the firelight reflecting on the faces of young and old, as if dancing in the darkness. They sang, they prayed, they laughed through tears. A sacred feast, a ritual to celebrate the mercy of heaven, giving them food from above. The meat was cut with a sacred stone blade, grilled on glowing coals. No one expected the smoke rising from that pile of meat would carry something invisible, deadly, slowly seeping into the lungs, into the blood, into the bones. The singing echoed in the desert night. No one knew this was the last feast. No one knew. The gods were not there. But the next morning, the celebration turned to hell. The morning sun was not as warm as usual. It shone down on a village filled with groans and blood. The people who had eaten the meat the night before began to scream, not from hunger, not from simple stomach aches, but from something burning them from within. They threw up, the vomit gray as radioactive sludge, with a strange metallic smell they had never known. Their skin was swollen, peeling, covered with purple rashes, as if someone had scratched it from beneath the flesh. Children cried out in the thatched huts. Old people collapsed, clutching their chests, eyes rolling back. Warriors who had stood firm in the desert now crawled on the ground, groaning like wounded animals. Some fell without a sound, as if life had been squeezed out of them in the middle of a heartbeat, leaving their eyes wide open in horror, staring into nothingness, as if they had seen something no one should see. The sand was stained red, not with blood but with rotting flesh, oozing pus, shapeless decay. The gift from heaven had turned into a curse. No one sang anymore. No one prayed anymore, for the angel had not brought blessings here. Only the hand of a dead god, carrying invisible fire, poisonous dust, and the cold silence of a judgment no one understood. The day passed, not fast, not slow, just dragging itself along like a dying animal, not dead, but not alive either. A few began to move again, but they were no longer themselves. Their eyes lost their fire. Their voices fell like broken fragments. Their flesh was covered with purple-gray blotches, as if drawn by a cruel hand. Others never rose again. Men collapsed in the huts they had built with their bare hands. Women died with their arms still holding their children, their blood seeping into the sand like the tears of the earth. The children no longer cried. They just fell, lightly, and never moved again. The tribe stood watching, eyes wide open, as if they closed them they would not have to witness what was happening, but death came, man by man, family by family, without exception. And then they began to dig, not with ceremony, no more prayers, only empty, cold, ash-filled pits, dug with bare hands and dried tears. They buried their loved ones under the red earth that had fed them for generations. The place that had once been filled with laughter, the smell of roasting meat, and the footsteps of hunting, was now a nameless graveyard. No headstones, no markers. No one had the strength to remember. Only the silent shadows of mounds of earth bulged in the dead desert. The living began to look at each other like shadows. No one dared to speak, but they all knew in their hearts this was not a disease. This was judgment, a curse in the form of light, and they ate it. What kind of God would give them death as a blessing? Whispers began to spread. Like poisonous smoke, they seeped into every corner of the tent, into every silence of the tribe. Some said the meat had been poisoned, that the beast had eaten something not of this world. Others whispered of charms, of ancient black magic, that they had sinned, had offended some spirit that lived in the sand, in the wind, in that blinding light. Some said it was a punishment from heaven, that the gods did not give gifts, but sent down wrath in light, in wind, in invisible fire. But Neri could not say anything, not because he did not want to, but because he did not know where to begin. How could he recount that light, a light that did not shine, but burned away memories? How could he explain the shuddering screech like metal rubbing against bone, or the hot wind that blew the soul from the body, leaving only a shivering shell of flesh? How could anyone believe that he had seen kangaroos floating like corpses on invisible strings, suspended between two worlds? No one believed. No one wanted to hear. And so he remained silent. Years passed. The desert still burned under the sun. But inside Neri, something was burned forever. The nightmare did not come at night. It was in his breath every day, in the bright sunlight that filtered through the shields of his eyelids, in the wind that whistled from the empty space. He carried it with him, like a shadow clinging to his spine, a nameless mystery, a cursed memory, and for the rest of his life he could never escape it. 1967. The truth did not come out. It crawled, dragged through the red sand like some strange, deformed creature from hell. The British government returned to Maralinga, with no explanation, no remorse, only equipment, crews in protective gear, and a desperate attempt to wipe the blood from their hands that the world could not see. The long-standing secret finally emerged. In the darkness of politics and science, they had detonated nuclear bombs. Not one, but many. Silent explosions, unannounced firestorms, death doses clinging to the wind, the water, the flesh. Neri and her siblings were never warned. There they stood just a few miles from the death zone, under the giant blades of an invisible atomic hammer. In their eyes, it was the light of a miracle. But in reality, it was the last look of a demon just released from an artificial hell. What they called the test area was actually a cemetery. No tombstones, no names, only bones quietly rotting under the sand, and memories like rusty needles piercing Neri's mind until the end of her life. What Neri naively believed to be a divine gift from the sky was in fact a death cloud, silently seeping from the artificial realm. The kangaroos had not been given. They had been torn apart in an instant by an invisible shockwave, then thrown to the ground like broken puppets. Their flesh, soft, red, seemingly alive, had been soaked with radioactive dust. A poison that was colorless, odorless, soundless, but killed cell by cell. The tribe's sacred feast was not a festival. It was a sacrifice, a cruel ritual in which the living ate death, drank the blood of oblivion, and celebrated it with laughter, unaware of their dying. They had unwittingly invited death into their bellies, and death, patient as it was, began to tear them apart from within. No one knows exactly how many people died from the fallout that fell like a silent curse from the sky. No one counted. No one recorded. No one wept for them. The British government returned like a ghost, sweeping up evidence. burying the truth, sweeping away every trace with shovels, and lies ironed out with suits. Then the Australian government wrote a number on a piece of paper, $13.5 million, and called it justice. But money cannot buy back the names that were blown away by the wind, cannot soothe the cold rust in the bones of the survivors, cannot rebuild a tribe that was silently gutted like a corpse. Neri survived, but that is not called living. He carried a poisonous wind in his memory, a white fire in his eyes, a soundless sound that whispered every night of light tearing the sky. Kangaroo meat falling like deadly sweet talk, and the people he loved turning to ash in silence. No one asked. No one wanted to hear. Only Neri remembered, and that memory never died. Now in his 80s, Neri still tells the story, his voice trembling, his eyes still seeing the white light of that year. A story no one believes, but no one dares to laugh. A story of a bolt of lightning that split the sky, of kangaroos suspended by invisible hands, of a party that turned into a funeral, where songs and wails mingled with smoke and red sand. He doesn't tell it to scare anyone. He tells it to warn, because what seems like a blessing from heaven is actually a curse hidden beneath the cracked earth, waiting for the right moment to rise. And when it does, it won't roar. It will whisper, the way death came to his tribe, silently, politely, and irrevocably. Thanks so much for sticking around. Leave your thoughts on today's episode in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. We've got hundreds of videos waiting for you to explore, so you can binge on them non-stop. But if you could only pick one video to watch, one that I'm sure you won't want to miss, this is it. Go watch it, if you dare. Okay, see you next time. Take care.